Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to this Wednesday's call. Today we're focusing on decision making, which is, I think, a really critical piece of info for us to focus on. Just before we get into that, I'd like to cover a couple of logistics. A number of you, when you're getting the weekly messages that we send out, re-registering your interest, you don't actually have to do that. Basically, when you're registered for a start, the call will automatically have you included in it. The Zoom link that we are using is also the same link every single Wednesday at 2 o'clock Perth time. So you can just use the same link and you'll be on the call. All you need to do is click the link at the time and away you go. We won't change the link and we'll keep doing this at 2 o'clock for as long as it remains useful on a Wednesday afternoon Perth time. The intent of it is to give you some useful and tactical stuff that you can use in the midst of what is a very, very unusual time on our planet. For perhaps the first time in living memory, we're in something that involves absolutely everybody on the face of the earth all at the same time. It's confusing, it's distressing. There are people in various stages of denial, of grief, of optimism, of struggling with illness and facing the implications of that directly. Various levels of impact on financial capability and ability to earn. So the intent of this is to give you some stuff that is intensely practical and can be used in the moments of pressure that we find ourselves in right now. Just a reminder of what we covered a few weeks ago, which was that guerrilla mindfulness tactic. So just taking 3 rhythmic breaths anytime you need to just slow that lizard brain down and get yourself out of that deeply stressed and agitated state. 3 breaths is a fantastic way to do that. It turns fight or flight off and just helps you to calm down and awakens this fantastic brain that we've got access to when we're not in panic and fight or flight mode. Step 2 was to say how you feel. Saying how you feel gives you the ability to compartmentalize that, but also to act in a way that's more effective in the moment. And step 3 is to just acknowledge what your intention is for whatever it is that you're in the midst of now. So if, for example, I'm down at the local shops and there's still no toilet paper and I'm starting to feel a bit anxious about that, I might take 3 breaths, say that I'm feeling anxious to myself, and restate my intent that I actually want to spread kindness and calm in the community right now. So punching someone in the face for the role that they've already got probably isn't a wise choice in that moment. I'm super excited today to have Jason Clarke join us on the call. I've known Jason for probably about 10 years. Jason helps people to think. His company Minds at Work has been doing that for quite a while now, and they help people think in all sorts of areas: creative thinking, decision making, adaptive thinking, change, leadership. And Jason describes himself as a plumber of the mind, so it's more about practical tools than big fluffy theoretical stuff. A number of years ago I was at a breakfast where Jason presented some stuff on high level decision making, where the decisions have consequences that are potentially serious and where the information is just not enough to know for sure whether you've got it nailed. And I think that really accurately describes the sort of territory that many of us are in right now. We've got decisions to make at a personal level, at the level of our family, our street and community, business if we're involved in it, and for some at the level of, really large scale organisations and countries. And so I thought it would be fantastic to get Jason to share that. He's going to spend about 15 minutes just laying this out for us. And I think one of Jason's superpowers is his ability to really succinctly snapshot stuff that is quite complex and give you ways to easily navigate it. So he's going to lay that out for us, and then we'll take some questions. So if you've got questions that you'd like to ask, if you just want to pop them into the chat box to everybody, you can type questions in there as we go. And when we get to question time, I'll basically pick some from there, and we'll have a quick chat with Jason to answer some of those questions. And then we'll give you a quick overview of where we're going to head next week, which is another really exciting expert in their field. So without further ado, I'm going to go find Jason on my list here and unmute him and hand the game over to him. Jason, the floor is yours. Welcome. It's fantastic to have you here, and really looking forward to hearing your piece on decision making again.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And hi, everyone. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to share my superpowers with you. At Minds at Work, we're really interested in tools which are kind of back of the envelope. We don't like overly complicated or difficult things. We think that life is hard enough, and tools should be very simple and very elegant. And the one that I've chosen tonight is one that's I've been using not only professionally but personally for almost 20 years, and I've used it to make some incredibly serious decisions. And I found that it's just made those decisions so much easier to make, and there've been decisions that I've never ever had to regret. So that's enough of a build-up. Let me get on with it. So what I'm going to do is I think now's an amazing time to talk about decision making under pressure. So when a decision comes my way, I don't tend to look at the content, like what is the decision about. My first questions are really about the structure of the decision. Am I choosing between 2 things or 200 things? That actually determines what kind of tools I would pick up. But the 3 things I'm really interested in is how much information do I have about the idea? How many choices am I working with? And how much time have I got? And they're really the 3 biggest questions that all the leaders of the world are trying to figure out right now. How much time do they have? How many options are left? And how much information is available to them? So I'm going to try and share my fancy little screen with you now, so you get to see the way we've learned to think about it at Minds. So let's see, that should be it there. If you think about the relationship between, as a situation unfolds, and the virus is now a perfect example of that, what we knew 2 weeks ago, it was much less than what we know now, and a month from now, we're going to know even more. So you might just decide, well, why don't we just wait? Let's just wait until we have enough or more than enough information. The problem is that as time is unfolding, options are decreasing. And this is what our politicians are I don't think they've quite understood, that the longer they wait for certainty, the longer they wait for better information, the fewer things will be left on the menu. So we've learned to think that look at that horrible X that's going on there. You want to be on the left-hand side of it. You want to give yourself time to think. So how long do I have to make this decision? I don't want to rush it, but I don't want to, take too long. How much time do I have to make the decision, to think about it? And have I left enough time to act? Have I allowed enough time that I could then put my decision into action? If I wait too long, I will have perfect knowledge and 0 options available. Okay, so I want to focus on binary decisions because they're the ones that people find really the most traumatizing. Life and death decisions. So should I cancel the wedding? Should the conference go ahead? Should I close my business? Should we close our borders? Binary questions tend to be the big dramatic questions. But it's interesting because structurally, they're the simplest decisions you have to make. Much easier than trying to pick, say, paint colors, because there's only 2 things on the menu and you can weigh them up one against the other. Now, most people are familiar with the concept of pro and con, and that's fine, that's great. But I'll show you how the grown-ups do it. This is what we call Pascal's wager. And this is where we look at not just what is the best thing that if I do, or the best thing that if I don't. We also ask the question, what is the worst thing if I do, and the worst thing if I don't? And this allows us to have 4 angles on any decision. And again, this is still basic back of the envelope stuff. So let me give you an example. one that we have every year in this country is the bushfires are coming. What are we going to do? Will I stay and defend my property, or will I jump out there and fight the fire? You've heard this conversation on Talkback Radio every year. It's the same decision every year. Let me show you my back of the envelope version of that. What would be the best thing that would happen if I stay and fight the fire and protect my property? Well, let's say future one, I get lucky. The fire wasn't as bad as I thought it was, or I'm more capable than I probably am. And we just barely dodge the bullet, but we get through. That's a great outcome. Let's look at future two. What is the worst thing that could happen if I stay and fight? The worst option is I lose the house and my life. That sounds pretty bad to me. And if I was just choosing between getting lucky and losing everything, I wouldn't find that a hard decision to make. But let's keep going. Future three. What would happen if I got the hell out? If I walked away from the property, let it burn, let whatever's going to happen, go somewhere where it's safe and spend a week with friends. What's the best possible outcome? Well, maybe I could still get lucky. Maybe my property will be saved. Maybe I get to visit some friends and get out of my space for a little while. Maybe I'll look smart because I avoided a catastrophe. That sounds pretty good to me. In fact, at the moment, that's the best option. But let's complete the cycle. What would happen if I got out of this place? What's the worst thing that could happen? Well, I've lost my entire property, but I'm still alive and I could start again. Now, when I look at those four options and I ask myself, if I was to choose the future that I wanted, which one would I choose? Now, I'm no farmer or nothing, but to me, future three looks like it makes the most sense. That I would much rather get out and risk losing a property than losing my entire life. Because if I stay for future two, I lose my property and my life. And the possibility that the fire is going to come remains the same whether I'm there or not. So this looks like a big conversation for people, a big decision. We can break it down to something quite simple. By choosing the future that I want, which choice gets me that future? Let's look at another one. My wife and I have been through this every time we've had to borrow money for a house. Do we fix the interest rate of the loan rate on the bank loan, or do we not fix it, let it be variable? And we're always wondering, well, what if the rates go up, or what if the rates go down? Well, here's the four futures. If I fix the loan rate and the rates go up, I got a good deal. If I fix the loan rate and the rates go down, I missed out on a bargain. I should have waited. If I don't fix the loan rate and the rates go up, I can't afford my mortgage. Or if I don't fix the loan rate and the rates go down, I got a good deal. In this case, it's pretty clear which of these futures I don't want. I don't want to be in a situation where I can't afford my mortgage. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to fix the loan rate. Do you see how this works? In one case, I chose the future I want. In the second case, I chose the future I didn't want. Could you do this with bigger things? Yes, you can. Should we clone human beings? Yes or no? Well, if we cloned them, the best thing that could happen is we would beat death and have multiple geniuses. But the worst thing that would happen is we'd have multiple Hitlers and probably destroy the natural order. If we didn't clone people, we could use that resources and time and energy and science to solve some real problems. We could do better things with our time. The worst thing that would happen if we didn't clone people is we'd still be mortal. Well, if I'm looking at that, this one's even easier for me to decide. I don't want to ruin the natural order, and I'd rather solve some real problems. So in this case, the solution is very straightforward for me. Don't clone people. Now, perhaps you'd come up with a better answer or a different answer. That's your call. These are the answers that I would make. But let me show you a tricky one. What would happen if the thing that I want and the thing that I don't want are actually the same choice? When my son was in his 20s, he wanted to go skydiving, to literally jump out of an airplane that was in the air. That's a binary decision. Once you've jumped, you can't unjump. Let's think of the best and the worst cases. The best thing that happens if he jumps, it would be challenging and life-affirming. He'd have a lot of fun. It would make him a confident human being. That sounds pretty good to me. What's his mum and I terrified of is the worst case scenario is he dies. That's pretty heavy. That's bad. But let's look at the other parts of the story. What's the best thing that happens if he doesn't jump? Well, I guess that's a stress-free afternoon for his old folks. On the other hand, the worst thing that happens if he doesn't jump is he resents us, or he becomes timid, or he loses his confidence, or he goes and does something worse. So look at this. The thing that we want and the thing that we don't want are actually consequences of the same choice. So how do I choose? This is the only time I would ever bother calculating risk. Because up until now, it's been a very clear decision-making process. Now I've got to say which of those two outcomes, number one or number two, is the most likely. So I'm going to show you a little ancillary tool for understanding risk. See, when people are afraid of risk, it's because they're afraid of the cost of the risk. What would happen if it goes wrong? But you've got to balance that against the odds of the risk. What are the chances of it going wrong? So the way I tend to think is in this little green wedge down the bottom here. Let's supposing that the cost of failure is monumental, death. But let's say the odds of that are almost negligible. Well, that's within that little green wedge. If the odds are low and the costs are high, it's worth doing. Conversely, if the odds are high and the costs are low, it's worth doing. The thing that I really should be avoiding are things where the cost is high and the risk is high. Do you see how this works? And to give you some examples, I'm pretty sure that none of you have taken out asteroid insurance. The cost of being hit by an asteroid would be the end of human civilization. But no one's worrying about that because it's actually a fairly unlikely thing. Similarly, if I got up at a karaoke night and made a fool of myself, the chances of that turning bad are almost 100%. But the cost of it going wrong, a little egg on my face, it's fine. But if I wanted to have a giant COVID-19 party, that is a high risk, high cost endeavor. That's the sort of risk I'm not prepared to take. This allows me to balance. I can make the same choice, even though one gives me the future I want, and it also contains the one that I don't want. And the funny thing is, where my wife and I have gone through some serious life-changing decisions, we've found that all the decisions that came were actually a sequence of these binary decisions. So how we answered the first one determines how we answer the next 10 or 15. And yet we've used this same back of the envelope technique in each step. So let me take this up a notch. Could you use this to make a decision in the dark? If you didn't have enough information, if you weren't sure, because this is how leaders have to work. We have to make calls without knowledge. And for me, the perfect example of this is climate change. Not everyone's convinced. And a lot of people are waiting for the science to come in. They're waiting for all of the information, by which time there will be zero options left. So here's the way I break it down. We act or we don't act. Sounds pretty clean. But now there's another layer here. It's true or it's not true. We act and it's true. We act and it's not true. We don't act and it was true. We don't act and it was false. If I want to look at the best and worst case futures I can imagine, I now have 8 things to think of, which is a lot more complicated, but it's still not much. What would be if we acted and it turned out that climate change was true? What would be the best outcome? Well, I'd say the best outcome is we did the right thing. Good for us. We were heroes. We thought about the future. We thought about our kids. What would be the worst thing that happened if we acted and it was true? We didn't do enough. We cut it too fine. We left it too late. We made it slightly better, but not good enough. What would be the best thing that could happen if we acted and it was false? Well, we didn't need to sacrifice, but we did. That's pretty heroic. We put our grandkids first. What would happen if we acted and it was false? The worst case I can think of is we destroy jobs and economies and entire industries for nothing. Okay, part 2. What would happen if we relaxed and it was true? What's the best thing that we could say? Well, we enjoyed our unsustainable lifestyle while it lasted. We smoked them if we got them. It was a good time, but that was the end of humanity. What would happen if we relaxed and it was true? What's the worst case scenario? Well, future number 6 is we destroy everything, not just the economies, not just the jobs, everything. That sounds to me like the worst possibility. Almost there. What if we relax and it's false? What's the best case? We celebrate our dumb luck. We dodged a bullet. But what if we relaxed and it's false? What is the worst case? Well, we'd never trust another scientist again, and humanity wouldn't have learned to actually solve their problems. Now, those 8 possibilities cover the entire debate. In fact, the debate, as I see it, not that it really qualifies as a debate, is between future 4 and future 6. Is it about jobs or is it about the planet? What's the worst case scenario here? And to my eyes, ruining jobs versus ruining the entire planet, future 6 contains future 4. So for me, this is a simple question. Which of these is the worst outcome? If future number 6 contains future number 4, then the question I want to be asking myself is not who's right about this, but who can't afford to be wrong. So this is why, for example, I'm very pro action on climate, not because I've been convinced by the science, but because I can think through rationally of the 8 possibilities, which one do I want to choose? So this is what we call Pascal's wager. It's a really simple tool. I've scaled it up here, and you can see it goes everything from, where did I put my car keys, to what do I do about cloning and climate change. So I thought maybe I should just take a breath there and throw it open to Mike and to the rest of you. Are there any questions, any thoughts? I'd love to hear what you make of this. And I'm going to turn off the sharing so I can see your faces.
Jason, thanks very much for that. So there's a couple of questions and comments that have come through here. So one is that there's a bit of a potentially complicating factor where you've got 3 variables. There's a back foot version, a front foot version, and a neutral version.
That's right.
As I would see it, that the last piece that you just laid out there, where you're kind of cascading the potential consequences of various options, kind of covers that. And then maybe in parallel with that, there's whatever your personal risk appetite is. So some people might say, look, I'm prepared to take a bigger risk than somebody who's potentially more conservative than me would. Stuff it, let's play. And others would pretty much always opt for the most conservative option. Do you think that comes down just to personal choice, or is there a bit more to it than that?
Let's unpack that. I think with terms of the risk stuff, I think it is a personal choice. I think some people are risk takers and some people are not risk takers. And so with these decision-making tools, it doesn't guarantee that all people will come to the same decision. In fact, that's almost never the case. All that matters is the person who needs to make the decision can make a decision and get on. What I've learned in 20 years of doing this, I have no vested interest in how people decide things. I've decided all I can do is help people make their choices clear and then let them choose what they want to choose. So I think that's part of that. That thing about, is it complicated if there's more than 2 choices? Yes, it is. But that structure, that very simple back of the envelope tool, I've used that for us up to maybe 10 possibilities with maybe 3 outcomes. But then that you really get to the limits of that tool. And there are other tools that I would use once you're looking at a much wider palette of options.
Sure.
In fact, we could do a whole other course, a whole other session just on what do you do if you're looking at 20, 30 or 50 options, but I'd be using different tools for that. This is really your binary life and death stuff. All the stuff that we've been talking about the last 3 weeks is binary and what they call exclusive. If I choose A, I can't do B. That's the tool I would use for that.
Yes. And it's certainly the case that, with people, we're still seeing people not staying home, for example. And I think it's a really good tool to just look at, okay, what are the consequences to that? If we choose to go outside, and I'm personally somebody who I'm not a straight out rule breaker, but I have a fairly healthy disregard for rules. And part of me would say, well, stuff it, I should be able to do what I like. But when you actually logically look at it, the consequences of that are pretty high, and the biggest consequences are probably to people other than me.
Do you know what? That's really interesting, because the conversations we have here, there's 3 of us living here, and the conversations we have is that, I want to go out and do something. And my son will say, what's the point of you going out? Why are you going out? What do you get by going out? And we've come to the shorthand where if he's wrong and we could have gone out, that's fine. If I'm wrong and we couldn't have gone out, we're screwed. So guess what? We do a shorthand. You can make a very quick decision based on who cannot afford to be wrong here. So I'm happy in a case like this, particularly because no one knows what this is. I'm happy to overestimate the risk and think, you know what? There's a couple of sunny days there I could have enjoyed. I could live with that. I can cope with that. Does that make some sense?
Yeah.
And we're having these conversations now every couple of hours about every damn thing. Do I go into work? Do I do this job? Do I, whatever that stuff. But it's the same question over and over again. It's always binary, and we're always looking at best case, worst case of 2 possibilities.
Yeah. There's also some questions around, some people will either for political reasons or personal reasons, will delay their decision until, you pointed out, the options become less and less the further forward in time you go.
That's right.
So there's a potentially a deliberate tactic, or one that happens just by nature of vacillating and procrastinating on the decision, that we end up with limited options and go, well, now we have no choice. It's this one.
That's right. That's right. But can I give you two reasons why that happens? One is people are very bad at making decisions which are less than ideal. So what happens if you've ever had a parent age, once they get above a certain age and they become sicker and sicker, there are no good choices left. And you've got to be able to resign yourself. And you've said this with survivalism. You've got to be able to say, instead of me waiting for a perfect choice that's not coming, the question is, can I choose a bad choice against a much worse choice? And that allows you to streamline the process, because you're not waiting for an ideal. You've said, I'm just dealing with what's on the menu right now. And I don't like either of them, but this is the least awful of the two. The second thing is, sometimes we hold out, because one of the great conflicts that I found personally is the choice between what is the right thing for me to do, or the smart thing for me to do, and what do I want to do. And so sometimes we wait because we're hoping this will still go the way we want it to go. And I think that's why governments have had the brakes on stuff like the quarantining issues, because they're hoping it's going to turn out okay. They would have been smarter to go, the best way is to stop this and go, you know what, we overshot this. That would have been a better call. Yeah.
There's a couple of things from survival psychology that are possibly worth throwing into the conversation here. So one is that the people that tend to do well against the odds when our backs are to the wall are the people who can face the reality squarely and do that early. And that, that's confronting territory sometimes, to say, well, here's what we're actually facing. And Dr. Jenny Brockes and I, when we were talking last week, said, there's a bit of a balancing act there around your mental health to say, how far do you want to stare into the possible consequences? You need to kind of be able to do that without just putting yourself into a downward spiral of worry. And then the other thing is that they are very, very good at just acting on the stuff that's within their control. And for me in this situation, although a lot of the choices are not, they're things I wouldn't necessarily personally want, there's that distinction between need versus want. They are pretty simple and pretty straightforward calls, like staying home is, I think, a really good example. Lynn has just popped up with a question about, do you have a view on head versus heart versus brain, gut, competing instincts in a crisis situation specifically?
Yeah, great question. You've actually got three brain systems. You've got a reptilian hindbrain down here, which is your instinct. You've got a midbrain system, which is really your emotional mindset. And then at the front here, the neocortex, this is your intellect. And what I find is that intellectual decision-making is where there is information that can be processed, where you can weigh things up, you can check the numbers, you can look at evidence. Then you make an intellectual decision. But if I'm stranded in the breakfast aisle at a supermarket and I'm looking at 500 brands of exactly the same frosted sugar flake thing, then I'll make a gut decision, because there is no difference between these. I found that the decisions I've made about who I spend my life with and what I'm attracted to and what I'm not attracted to, these are gut decisions. I can't do the maths on those things. So I find that the gut is the most ancient decision-making process, and it's really very good for making snap judgments if there is no information to be had. But it's a terrible way to run a country. That would be the way I'd look at it. That's the distinction. If you go to the casino and you're feeling lucky, your gut is wrong.
And that's another thing that comes out very clearly in survival, in the world of survival as well, is that instinct and gut decisions in areas where we have sound experience and good competency are usually very, very good decisions. But in situations where we don't, they often feel right but take us down wrong roads. And a good example of that is people who leave a vehicle when they're lost or stranded in the outback, because their instinct is, I've got to get back with other people. This being out on my own is no good. And at a gut level, it feels smart in the moment, in the cold light of day, when we're analysing it intellectually. You can look at that and just go, that's a crazy idea. Stay with your car.
Actually, the gut is a stronger system. The gut is more powerful in making decisions, and it's fast, but it's not very accurate.
Yeah.
So I find it's good for me summing people up. If there's someone lying to me, can I trust someone? My gut's good at that. It's good at telling me if I'm hungry. That's about it, I think, beyond that.
Yeah. Good stuff. Jenny's just saying that she loves the simplicity of this and the underlying question, can I afford to be wrong here? And I think that's a really good note. Is yes, that's a really great way of, I think, determining a useful way forward sometimes, is just to look at what are the consequences if this is wrong. Very, very useful frame, I think.
It's also what I would call a policy. It's a decision that you fret about once, and then you decide, now I have the shorthand algorithm for that. I will simply ask that question every time, and it just cuts to the chase.
Yes, yeah, good stuff. So a few people are also asking if this will be recorded, and yes, we're recording all of these sessions. If you're on the email list, then we'll basically send a link to the recording to you, so you can check it out and share it with people that aren't yet on the list and who you think this might be useful for. Jason,
Mike, are we able to send a link to the website? Because there's a lot of resources, materials and pieces that people who have been part of this webinar could have access to the website from here as well.
Yeah, so Jason's website, mindsatwork.com.au, has heaps of resources, and there's specifically a whole heap of stuff on decision making, including the bits that Jason's talked through today, and some other more detailed bits if the decisions get more complicated. So we're
happy to take questions beyond tonight. If you've got any questions or any thoughts, just get in touch.
Great. Yeah, so we'll send those links out in between. I'll stick you on mute for a second, Jason, and I'm just going to go see if I can find Stephen Young, who I did see on the call before. Stephen is going to join us on the call next week, and are you able to be on video, Steve? I've certainly got you unmuted. Are you there?
I think I am, Mike. How are you going?
Yeah, you are. G'day, Stephen. So Stephen's going to join us on the call next week. Stephen's got 40 odd years of experience locally and internationally in crisis management specifically. And he and I have worked together a number of times advising people like oil spill responders, high-end fire, large-scale incident responders, counter-terrorist responders in police forces and those kinds of bodies. Steve's got probably more experience in that area than anyone I know, and is brilliant at helping people to think through that and build organisational resilience, seeing where their gaps are. So Steve, we'll be having a chat next week. What'll be a couple of things that we're likely to be covering? It looks as though Steve might have disappeared. He's mute. I've unmuted you again, Steve. Go for it.
I missed that last bit. I dropped out. I think where I live, everyone's using the internet, so the connection's pretty dodgy.
It's that time of night in Brisbane where everyone's logging into Netflix and giving it a pounding.
Yeah, I think they're downloading the night shows.
So yeah, the question was, what are we likely to be covering on the call next week around managing and leading in a crisis?
Right. So I thought, Mike, it'd be worthwhile talking about 3 of the 5 crisis leadership tasks that I think every person in an organisation at the top should be thinking about, and that is sense making, trying to make sense of what's actually happening. And I think that's the biggest challenge here, certainly from my perspective, trying to understand what's happening in a completely novel scenario. One, as you said, I've got 40 years experience, one that I hadn't actually thought through. The second part, which Jason's covered fantastically today, would be about decision making, but more about who do we need to bring in the tent? Who do we need to coordinate with respect to making those decisions? So it's fine to make decisions, but often, in my experience, people in a crisis make a decision in isolation. And often they're better made in coordination with others that are likely to be affected by decisions. And then the final piece of the 5, and I know I'm only going to talk about 3, is the meaning-making piece. How do we make meaning for our staff? How do we make meaning for our stakeholders? And the 4th and 5th part of those 5 crisis leadership tasks is really about the accountability piece. What can we do now to make us more accountable when the review comes? And I guess that everyone's struggling with that. And the final one is, how do we learn from this? And, but I reckon next week we should talk about the first 3: sense-making, decision-making, coordinating, and meaning-making.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Steve. And I think that'll be a really fantastic springboard off the back of what Jason's covered today. So if you're in leadership or you know anybody that is, it'll be well worth being on that call or grabbing the recording, and look forward to sharing that with you next week. That'll be really, really useful stuff. Jason, I'll just cross back to you very briefly for any wrapping comments or anything else that you want to mention there off the back of this, and then we'll wind this call up and see you 2 p.m. next Wednesday.
No, the only thing I want to say is that decision-making is something where there are lots of tools and lots of techniques. And I know I've been taking a very simplistic view of some very complicated issues here. But if I don't have time to make a decision and I haven't got all the information and my options are dwindling, sometimes I have to make a good rough call and then sort of learn as I go downstream. So there are more tools, there are more techniques, but that's my favorite simple one to start with. So give it a go. Great.
So there's a couple of people that are just saying that they're having a look at your website and haven't found those tools. If you're on Jason's website, navigate to the blog. There's a pull-down menu on the blog. Decision making is one of the subsets there. Everything that Jason's spoken about is there. And we will also share the recording of this particular call as well, which will include the slides, so that you'll have that anyway.
And Mike, if anyone wants to, they can just get in touch with me at jason@mindsetwork.com.au. And so if they can't find it one way, I can just shoot them whatever they need.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jason. So we'll include Jason's website address and email address in the mail out when the recording is all processed and ready. Thanks again for joining us. We will see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Catch you then. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.